Well, it's October in our fall gardens, y'all, and I've got a number of things on my list. You might want to put them on yours too, starting with assessment. I'm going to share with you what is my biggest fail and how I'm going to remedy it. I want to take a look, something really interesting about reblooming hydrangeas, notably white wedding hydrangeas, and in that regard, I'm going to cut a white bouquet, a really great hack for planting perennials that you want to bloom in a beautiful rhythm across your space next year. Well, just a lot to get to, Stuart, so what do you say? Let's do it. Well, I don't care how carefully and how well you design your yard, whether you design it yourself or someone does it for you. There are going to be changes that you want to make after the design is actually executed and you live in that space for a while. Hello, Mr. Squirrel. The squirrels have been going crazy. And for me, probably, I won't bury the lead, my biggest, well, in some ways it was my biggest success, but now has turned into the biggest thing that I want to change. And that is all of the ajuga that I planted in between all of these stepping stones. It grew voraciously. It was really, really beautiful, but you can see now that its coverage is starting to be decimated, and for a couple of different reasons. Number one, I think because I underestimated just how poor the soil was here, and I wanted to do in some of these spaces minimal amendments, and because of that, the plants suffered. Now these look okay, but other areas, like at Stuart's feet, that succumbed to fusarium wilt that I talked about before. And it's very, very difficult to address. And consequently, I'm going to assume that most of the ajuga that's planted here is going to succumb to that fusarium wilt in the future. Now, something else that's been a problem very unexpectedly to me, because I've never had this problem on my ajuga before, and that is it started developing late in summer, very late in summer, all sorts of powdery mildew. And even though I've used an organic fungicide, still it's a problem, and it is really, I think, making all of the ajuga definitely look less than its best. It's reducing its appeal. Now, I could really try to figure out what all of these problems are. I could address the soil quality. I could do things to increase air circulation back in here, but all of those are very difficult problems for me to mitigate. So what I think I'm going to do is really put on my detective hat and come up with the reason, the primary reason I think it is spread so rapaciously, and that is my hose, my beloved metal hose. Okay, so I'm going to take a break here because we are filming this on Tuesday, October 8th, and today and tomorrow's Amazon Prime Day, and a lot of my very, very favorite things are on Amazon Prime, and we're going to put a link to my whole list of Amazon favorites, and I believe one of the things on it is, it's not the exact one, but it's very similar. It's ranked just as well, and that's a metal hose, in addition to my beloved Works blower and a bunch of other things. So there's my little commercial there. There will be a link below where all of my favorites are listed. But what I think happened is there started to be a problem in one patch, and as you can see here, my water spout is on the other side. It's on the west side of my backyard. And as you can see here, we've got Hub's hammock holder, so he can quickly put it into place if he needs to take a snooze in the afternoon. But back to my problem. So my faucet hookup is around the corner to the west, and because of that I have to drag my hose across this expanse all the way over to here to be able to water whatever it is I am going to water. And I think by doing that, what it did was spread that infection, both the fungal infection and the fusarium wilt. I think that's what it did. It spread the powdery mildew across the space, and that's why everything that was vulnerable to it,
Sherlock Linda.
Yeah, Sherlock Linda came down with it too. So you say, Do I regret trying? No, I don't, because it was a very unique problem. It was very, very successful before it failed, and it now tells me what direction I need to go next. The advantage of it doing it late in the summer was that a lot of the other stuff has already filled in. So the importance of the ajuga to soften the edges and take up space isn't as important as it once was. Now there's a lot of other stuff that has filled in that makes me feel as if the backspace is complete. So what am I going to do? When it gets a little bit cooler, because despite my jacket that I've got on this morning, it is still going to get up in the high 80s, mid 90s today, I believe. And so what I think I'm going to do is just wait till it gets a little bit cooler, and then I'm going to come in here, I'm going to remove most, if not all, of the ajuga, and then I'm just going to continue with the pea gravel in all of the spaces where the ajuga is now growing. And that will make it, excuse me, that will make it look very consistent across the space, and it will flow very rhythmically and harmoniously with the rest of the garden. So that's what I'm going to do. I'll obviously show you that once it gets complete. That will be a pretty easy and inexpensive fix. And in addition, another thing that I noticed was that my hose would constantly, and you guys may have intuited this when you saw me use it earlier, and if so, why didn't you tell me? Not really. It would get caught like this, and then I'd have a hard time pulling my hose. So now that won't be an obstacle to me using the hose very fluidly and very easily. So that's what I'm going to be doing. That's on the agenda for later this week, I think. And then also I have noticed that now that some of the boxwood has gotten a little bit bigger, look at how beautifully these better boxwood here are starting to grow into balls. By next spring, these will be just very, very mature. But I've noticed that because of that, I don't need as many of some of the other smaller things that I've got planted in here, and some of those will be removed and relocated. So that was my number one thing, and number one thing I would recommend to you is really assess what worked and what didn't work in your garden, and then try to come up with ways to either remedy the situation or alter it entirely. Now let's move on to number 2. Okay, so this is a twofer tip. So you may recall that I told you how I had seeding troughs, and earlier in the year I seeded a bunch of foxglove in not only a concrete trough up front, but also just an empty pot of soil that I had in the back. I've got these 2 tours on it to keep the squirrels from digging. But look how beautiful these seedlings of foxglove look. And I'm going to put those out now because foxglove are a biennial. They put on their foliage in the first year and they bloom in the second year. So by the time I put those in my flower bed, they will be ready to bloom next year. And I'm going to do that, and I'm going to use some of these handy flags as a device to kind of help me get the flow that I want. But here's my second tip and second idea. If you've got an empty pot like this, and after I remove all of these foxglove, I will too, I'm going to get out some of my perennial seeds that I've just got in storage. And if they are something that needs cold weather to germinate, then I'm going to go ahead and seed some of those in my seeding trough and see if they germinate over the winter and are ready to plant out next spring. In most cases, they're old packages of seeds. The viability may not be great, but it's a gardening risk worth taking. And boy, is it fun if they germinate and I can plant them out in the spring or in the late winter. Well, I've already got several, actually more than several, of those foxglove seedlings in place, but I'm sure there are areas that I still need to add them so I get this kind of drift of them across the front yard when they bloom next spring. So here is my trick. These flags are just invaluable. You can get them at any hardware store. I just save mine from one purpose to the next. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a flag where I have planted my existing foxglove. You can see there's one there. Here's one that's not very large. Still, I've got one. There's one here. There's one here. Back here. Actually, there's several back in this area because I want them to weave. You can see over here, I've got a number of them, Stuart. And I want them to weave in and out of the flower bed in a horizontal drift so that it's parallel with the street and you can really see them. So then what I can do, once I get a flag on each one or each group of them, then I can come back and I can see where I need to place additional foxglove to complete the drift. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Does that make sense to you guys out there? So you can kind of see what my motivation is. So I can see that they're planted pretty heavily through here, but as I get over in this direction, they begin to thin out. And so I'm going to want to add a number of them in areas a little bit more over this way where I want them till they eventually fade out. But also in some of these areas, I want them to grow in greater density so that it's not just one foxglove coming up, but a group of them. So that's what I'm doing on this side. You can see there's a number of them in here, and I might want to add one there. But I am putting the flags in place where they currently exist, not where I want to add them, which is what I usually do. So this way I can easily see how my drift is turning out. So I'm going to go back over here now. I can see I've got one planted in here. And on this side, I definitely think I need a lot more, and I also want a lot more right around where the roses are growing, because I think that's a beautiful combination. And if you look here, Stuart, you can see how some of them are just tiny, but they will continue to grow into big boys, not unlike these over in here. So I'm just going to continue doing this. And then I'll come back, I will stand at the street, I will assess where I want to plant more, and my vision, with the help of a lot of these flags, will become reality next year. Now it's interesting to me that a lot of pests didn't arrive until very late in the season, and one of them that has arrived, much to my vexation, is the spotted cucumber beetle. And they have been devouring the buds and the flowers of my dahlias, and it's really driving me a little bit crazy.
Don't they know a dahlia is not a cucumber?
I don't know that they don't know that, Stuart. You need to let them know. But here's why I'm not aggressively treating them, and that's, look at all of the bees that are around here. Well, as soon as I say that,
Yeah,
look right there. See, I have so many bees, and I have had so many monarch butterflies. Who knew that dahlias were such pollinator attractors? That I'm being very, very careful about using neem oil or insecticidal soap or anything, because now is peak season for those monarchs to come through, and all those bees are just so happy. So sometimes we have to put up with a little imperfection in our garden to achieve our goal of the entire vision of a whimsical garden with lots of flying wildlife. But wait, here is another thing that is also a Prime Day deal, and I have 3 of them. I have the large one and I have 2 of the smaller one, and that's these storage boxes for outside. In fact, this one used to be over there, and because I accessed it so frequently, I moved it over here below the window box, and it's kind of hidden by this pot. But they're wonderful. What I really love about them is that they're watertight, so I can store things in here, and when it rains, things don't don't get wet, i.e. my garden gloves, all of my tools, etc. So these two are on my list. I'll try to put an individual link below, but this is something you might want to check out on Amazon Prime Day. Well, this isn't a color that I typically think of as being autumnal, but nevertheless, white can be beautiful in the fall. Think baby boo pumpkins. And I'm going to cut a late season white flower arrangement with things that are blooming white in my garden. One of them being the Encore azaleas. Now, the two of my favorites are the pink Encore Carnation. You guys know I love them, and they've been blooming their heads off for about 6 weeks now. I also love the white. I believe this one is Moonlight. Now, an argument for getting one of the Encore varieties that grows a little bit taller is if you want to use them in cut flower arrangements, and typically I do. That way you'll get longer stems. So I'm going to cut some that are in bloom right now for my arrangement, and those that have expired, obviously I'm just going to come back in here and I'm going to pick them off. Now, an unusual white flower that you may not think of for your white flower arrangement would be the white flowers on the Miss Lemon Abelia. So I'm going to cut just a few strands of this for filler. Isn't that gorgeous? Really beautiful for filler, and the color of that stem kind of makes it go a little bit more in the autumnal, traditional autumnal palette. Okay, so I'm going to put that in there. Okay, now let's take a break here while I straighten up my back, and then we're going to go to another area of the garden where I've got more white things in bloom. Okay, it's already looking beautiful if I do say so myself. So now I'm going to add some white It's a Breeze roses, which really look beautiful, and right now they are not eaten up by Japanese beetles. I'm going to make sure that if there's any spotted cucumber beetles on these, that I don't bring them indoors. And I'm looking really for the freshest blooms. The nice thing about this is I'll get beautiful blooms, and I'll also be able to kind of control its size a little bit. And I anticipate that if we don't get a hard freeze, these might still be blooming around Thanksgiving, so you could do a gorgeous flower arrangement with them. Okay, so now let's take a look at how it looks so far just in my garden truck. Pretty exceptional, if I do say so myself. But now here is the last thing you would expect to be blooming this time of year. And that is a white wedding hydrangea. So here is a tip and something for you to add to your white floral arrangement. So look at this. Is this not gorgeous? Okay, really beautiful, very fresh. I actually have a number of them that are in bloom right now, and I can cut them for my bouquet. Look at this. This plant here has 1, 2, and 2 huge buds and another bud about to break. So I don't want to completely denude my plant of all of its flowers, but look at that. Isn't that just gorgeous? Okay, so I'm going to take that, and because I like to do things in threes, look at this one back here. Here's one too. Now, here's the tip. Now that I have noticed that, and by the way, you might want to leave all of these on your plant because they look beautiful in a dried state. Like these over here that are a little bit more protected in the shade, and you can see there even one of the Dear Dolores purple ones is beginning to bloom again. Because again, these are reblooming hydrangeas. I don't ever plant hydrangeas that don't rebloom or bloom on new wood anymore. So now I've got pretty much probably enough material to complete my bouquet. But what's the tip, you say? So I noticed, leave you in suspense. So I noticed that these still look beautiful. But earlier in the summer, as this low sun really began to fry these, the plants are still doing fine, but the flowers begin to dry and turn brown and crispy, and I don't like that. So as soon as I notice that they are beginning to turn brown and crispy, I'm going to deadhead selectively these in the front that are in more sun. Why? Because I want them to put out new blooms that look like that in the fall, and they will do that if I deadhead them. And those that rebloomed were because I probably had cut one of them earlier in the season as a cut flower, or because indeed I had deadheaded it. And if you deadheaded the entire expanse of these white weddings, think how many new blooms you would have this time of year, because it's still not a freeze. And I think that's just a pretty exceptional and wonderful fall surprise, don't you? So let's stop here. I'm going to take this out so you can see just how beautiful it looks. I might see if there's anything else in my white palette that I could add to the arrangement, and then we'll take a look at it in its entirety. Well, I think this white vignette is really, really stunning. And in fact, if I just had nothing but this porch, I would probably be tempted to do nothing but a completely white fall decor theme on my front porch. I think it looks absolutely beautiful. All of these white bloomers along with some white chrysanthemums. I've got a large basket of it here. I found a smaller just junk basket at the thrift store that kind of repeats this same weave, and I put another pot of white chrysanthemums in there, and then all it takes is just some white pumpkins to complete the vignette. I think it's really beautiful. I just kind of threw this together in a matter of seconds. But you could also do this inside by your fireplace, on your hearth. I think it would really be fresh and a new take on fall decor, inside or out. Well, before I talk about my next tip, I want to show you something absolutely precious. One thing that I've started to do kind of as a collection is collect images of the cottage. And there were two darling neighbor boys who came over the other day, and they were selling works of art. And they did a drawing of my cottage, and they sold it to me. I think it was all of $3.50, and they signed it for me. Thank you, Simon and Wesley. And look at how it really does look like the cottage. I think it's so, so dear. Yeah, so it's not always lemonade that kids are selling or scraping ice and snow off of your steps. Sometimes it's an original work of art. Okay, so on to my next tip. One of the things that's so beautiful in the spring, and it really is beautiful all during the growing season if you deadhead it enough, and that is this East Friesland salvia. And you can see that a lot of it is still blooming. Let me do a little weeding here while I'm down here. And you can see that it's still blooming, putting out new shoots, but also there's some old shoots, and those old shoots are starting to set seed, and it will go to seed, and it has throughout my garden. And what I want to do is just kind of be attentive to where it is. Like you can see some here, you can see some there, there's a seedling down there. And pretty soon, if I don't stay on top of it, this entire area will be completely filled with East Friesland, and it may or may not be beautiful, but it won't be as distinctive if I don't leave some negative space in between the mounds. So one thing I think I'm going to do is I'm going to start digging some of this up. Now is the perfect time for planting and transplanting, so I will share it with friends. But then another thing that I observed was I've got this boxwood basil here, I've got all of this East Friesland in here, I've got all of that lantana in here in the foreground, and even the sunshine ligustrum. Well, all of this is going to lose its leaves in the winter. So what does that tell me? It tells me that I probably want to add some more evergreen interest right in here in the form of a small shrub, maybe a better boxwood, maybe a conifer or something, so that in the winter I have a little bit more evergreen space. Because as beautiful as this East Friesland salvia is, too much of a good thing is still too much. And in closing, I wanted to share this with you, and I keep forgetting. I did indeed order some awnings for this door to nowhere and also the door in the backyard. And I will give you the great reveal on what color I selected and what style I selected when indeed they're installed. But I did want to point that out to you because that's another change that's coming. There's a little bit of a lead time. And then over here, I still have a little bit more styling to do, but I really wanted this to be my white vignette area. I kind of described it to you a little bit on the front porch, but this is where I want it to live for the fall. So I'll add some more white lumina and baby boo pumpkins. I've got a better boxwood ball. I believe this one is Skylight, and they make perfect boxwood balls over time. So I've got one in here, and then I've just added some white chrysanthemums. And if I can find it, I might come in and even plant some variegated light green and white ivy to really complete this composition. And that will be beautiful into spring. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed this Wednesday walkabout today. Lots of tips that I hope you will find useful, and you can find us this weekend on The Garden Life. See you then.